Hello, and welcome to the Bite-Sized Theology Podcast, Extended Edition, Episode 40. Coming to you from two fellas who are staring longingly at each other in a canoe. It is Thursday, the 6th of August. I'm your host, Aaron Lively. Joining me this week is Sage Blaylock.
Afternoon, Aaron.
Afternoon, Sage. And I know I jested last time, but John McCord this time is actually out sick. How are you doing, Sage?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm not sick. I suppose whatever has afflicted John has not yet reached me. So that's good. I'm mostly only concerned about my own health. So
can you transmit viruses over the internet?
I think that's one of the primary places that viruses are transmitted, if I understand them correctly.
That's what I've heard. So I think we're kind of in danger then if we've done podcasts with him. I don't know if we should keep doing that, you know? Like, I'm nervous. We're quarantining him electronically too.
Yeah, so I think from this moment on, we need to wait 14 days before either of us correspond with John over the internet or podcast with him.
Completely agree. Yeah, because who knows? One text askew could be all it takes, you know? That could be all it takes.
I'm not going to send that text, and I'm not going to answer any from him either. I'm not going to take any chances.
That's right. Good luck, John, in total silence and solitude. Great, here we go. So normally, Sage, when you and John are two-in-a-canoeing, there's this painfully long, drawn-out segment where you speculate about where I am. My version of this is much shorter. So let's say, hypothetically, John isn't here, not because he's sick, but because he was sentenced to 5 years in prison. So based on who John is, what crime do you think he committed that caused him to end up in prison for 5 years?
I would like to think that he was in Texas and potentially at a bar or a restaurant that served alcohol, and he got in a historical conversation with some very patriotic Texans about Tennessee versus Texas, and and John wanted to point out that many Tennessee volunteers were involved at the Alamo, and the people from Texas didn't want to give them their due. So a very long comical bar fight ensued in which John ended up getting arrested and is now going to jail for 5 years for property damage and desecrating the flag of the state of Texas.
That's very probable. That's so John.
It is.
Yeah. That's great. I completely could see that happening without a doubt. I would say, I think it would probably have to do, so it's either going to be public urination while under the influence. I also think it could have something to do with prosperity gospel preachers. Like, he slashes the tires of their private jets and then gets the maximum possible sentence because they have more money than he does, and they can afford much better legal representation. I think that's probably the most likely scenario. If I had to go,
I completely agree. If I had to pick three scenarios where John goes to prison for 5 years, it would probably be those three. So I'm with you. I still go with mine. Mine's my favorite, but those are also good.
Oh, yeah. That sounds great. All right. Well, good. You got something to work with, John. Next time you get in prison, those are some things to try. Anyways, now I am going to go ahead and talk briefly about Patreon. Patreon.com/Bite-Sized Theology. Sage, do you know what Patreon.com is?
Honestly, not familiar with it, Aaron. Can you tell me about Patreon?
Of course. Patreon.com/Bite-Sized Theology is where those of you who are listening to this can go. If you like what we do, believe in our mission, and want to support us, we spend a lot of time putting these podcasts together, writing blogs, doing editing, and so on. And if you want to help us keep doing all of that, you can support us by going to patreon.com/Bite-Sized Theology and subscribing to us at the $1 level. That's $1 a month. Just throw us $1 a month. That $1 a month helps keep us doing what we're doing. And for some of you hearing this, you probably hate what we're doing, and it's probably too ridiculous, far too ridiculous for you. And that's cool. Don't throw us anything. Just be here and cringe along with us, one step at a time. And if you end up cringing so much that you start convulsing with joy instead, sub to us at the $1 level at patreon.com/bitesizetheology. All right, moving on to our opening segment, which we will be doing in the absence of John, very unfortunately, which means, it just means the United Nations knows that we are short. We're short a few ideas, so they're giving us some other ideas for us to try and solve. This opening segment is called Simple Solutions, and in case you had no idea based on my convoluted setup of this bit, the United Nations is sending us all of the problems that they don't have time to solve because they've got other important things going on in the world right now, needless to say. So I have 3 of the world's not so biggest problems, and we here in the podcast are going to solve them live. Are you ready, Sage?
I'm ready.
All right. Number 1. Salmonella.
So I think it's really important when eating chicken to cook your chicken. And, people say all sorts of different contradictory things when it comes to this, like, no, you can eat chicken raw, but that's not true. If you eat chicken raw, it's really bad for you.
Yeah.
So
it's also chewing on a tire, almost. A very moist tire.
A very moist, disease-ridden tire. Yeah, absolutely. So, contrary to popular belief, where people would tell you that raw chicken is better in some cases, that rare chicken or blue chicken, for you steak people out there, is the superior version of chicken. Disagree. Could not disagree more. If you want to eat chicken and enjoy it, and also not have to go to the hospital afterwards, cook your chicken all the way through. All the way through.
That's pretty good. I think that's reasonable. I'd say that's a good step in the right direction. What I would say, though, Sage, you forgot to consider that I actually, listen, man, I'm not a food expert. I have no idea. I found out the other day salmonella is in a lot of other things too, potentially. So I found out the onions I purchased from the grocery store the other day got recalled. And I did not know this until they were handing me my receipt. And then they were like, oh, yeah, you can come by later and return those if you want. Like, I don't see why they don't just be like, hey, do you want to return those right now? I guess not. I have to come back another time and return those onions potentially. But I looked it up. I found out the reason they got recalled is because 500 people ate them and got salmonella from it. So what I would say is this. If we're going to fix salmonella across the entire board, we already all have so much Germex in our houses because of the whole COVID nightmare that's happening.
So much.
Everyone just Germex your food before you eat it. Germex it. Drop some antibacterial stuff on there. Honestly, we should abolish bacteria. Abolish. Straight up abolish it. And so I think the way that we do that is treat everything with Germex. You know what I mean? Treat it with love, treat it with respect, give it a nice massage, a Germex massage, and let it cushion you inside and outside. The Germex from bacteria. Shielding you from bacteria is the main goal. So yeah, I'd say we're
solved.
It's solved. Okay. Burnt food.
So what a lot of people will tell you is that food is better when it's burnt. Now, I'm not a food expert. I'm not a chef. I'm barely even a sous chef. So what I say is that burnt food while still edible in many cases, is not the best version of that food that you can eat. In fact, I would say that you can cook food well and not burn it. You can even get a nice crunch on there, get a nice finish on a steak or chicken, for example, that's been cooked all the way through. So this is where we get into a conversation about moderation. So some people will say, oh, you told me not to eat the food raw. Why can't I eat it burnt, crisp as charcoal? Well, which one is it, Sage? Well, the answer is moderation.
Yeah.
It's cook your chicken enough. Cook your chicken, cut into it, check and make sure, using a thermometer to check the internal temperature, make sure it's above 165. Just find out what the internal temperature needs to be on your food and cut it. Cook it right, cook it well. You don't have to burn it. I'm telling you that there's another way. If you eat your food only burnt, and that's the way you've lived your life, and you haven't enjoyed meals, it's because you've burnt all the flavor off. Moderation, my friends. Moderation.
I'd say that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Half solved. We can say half solved because there's two of us working on it. Okay. Well, it depends on what you're burning, you know? Like, if you're burning a marshmallow, maybe that's pretty good. Slap that on some s'mores. That's a good time. Like burnt cheese. That's not too bad. Like get a little brownness going on the top of that. Ooh. Ooh. That's a good coating on top of a mac and cheese. It's like a little, just like this has got a little burn there. Now, if you're like burning it charcoal, like in the oven, like letting the oven go, like set the oven to a cleaning cycle and put all of the food that you're trying to cook in there afterwards, you might have some problems. But I'd say burnt food isn't necessarily a bad thing in moderation. But I think if we're going to solve the problem of burnt food, we have to just make chicken easier to understand as far as something that you cook. Because I think, here's the deal. You can cut into it and take a look. You could buy a thermometer. That's fine. But like, you know, it's just not as easy to tell if chicken has a little like rawness or rareness going on, as opposed to like a slab of ground beef, a slab of 182 pounds of ground beef. So I think obviously we need to make chicken easier to recognize. So if we could like do food dyes, like some kind of food dye that says, oh, like if it's chicken that's like still raw, that's like neon green, I think it'd like be a lot easier to cook chicken all the way through. But then you have to have the restraint. You have to have the restraint to say, you know what, I'm not going to cook it too much. So like I think we need another food dye applied to all other foods that says like, oh, like if it's like turning slightly neon blue, like I might be cooking it too much. I think like we need a color-coded system here. Like a very elaborate, I think we can set that up on the FDA level and just make sure everyone's doing it.
Absolutely. So, two things. I think, within the next couple of weeks, we will be putting up a color-coded food dye system on the Bite Size Theology website. So feel free to look after that. And secondly, I am open to introducing educational programs directly related to chicken into public schools and private schools as well. I think we can get them in on this so that children not only learn math, English, spelling, science, but also, is my chicken cooked? And we learn it from a very young age so that we never have this problem again, so that future generations don't have the same salmonella versus burnt problem that apparently we do.
Yeah. I'd say that's perfectly reasonable. Solved, United Nations.
Solved.
Got it figured out. Last one. Forest fires.
So a couple of weeks ago, I abolished fire in response to one of these. True. And I think that is a fine option.
Okay. Yep.
But I think something else we could think about. So the government, as we all know, has the ability to control the weather. So what I think we need to do is everyone right now, call your congressperson, call your senator, call everybody, call the president, call the vice president, call the secretary of education, all of them. Call them right now and say, hey, listen, I need you to control the weather and make it rain everywhere. Yeah. Everywhere we find out there's a forest fire.
Yeah. Okay.
Make it rain. Right now, I think there's still in the Amazon a forest fire going on for months that's just destroying it. If the United States government and the Brazilian government work together, both very competent governments, obviously, they could just make it rain and put out that fire. I don't see what the problem is. Basically, every government, especially the U.S. government, has the power to control the weather. I'm just saying use that power that you already have.
No one's going to argue with that. No. Makes perfect sense to me. Wow. Wonderful. Solved, I guess. I will add that I think if your forest is on fire, then you need to stop cooking chicken on the cleaning cycle of your oven. I think that's the perfect answer. Like, just stop it. Stop doing that. And I think we'll be good after that. So, solved. Thank you, everyone, for listening to Simple Solutions. If you have any suggestions on world problems you'd like us to solve live on this podcast, please write in to bitesizetheology.com/contact and let us know. And we'll solve your very own problems that we'll pretend are the UN's problems, and we'll solve them live right here for you and for the UN. Okay, moving on to our main topic, which is fantasy of the devil. Now, let's explain this a little bit. Actually, first I think we should add in our quotes of the week. A couple things. Let's see here. Okay. So, quote of the week. First one is from Deb DeEugenia, who says, "It's against my it's against my daughter's constitution. It's evil. It's witchcraft. I'm not paying taxes to teach my child witchcraft." And then the second quote of the week is from Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Boston, who says, "What I did is start a spiritual peanut butter ban on Harry Potter." So what are we talking about today, Sage? What we're talking about is, it's a bit of a lighter topic this time, sort of. So I think if you're raised in a more conservative, super conservative background growing up, you might hear growing up that you should watch certain things or you shouldn't watch certain things. There's some boundaries placed on what type of, I mean, even if you're not in a Christian conservative home, there's obviously going to be, for the most part, boundaries on like what you're able to watch. So some of that is super good and healthy. Not everything that's out there is going to be super emotionally or mentally or culturally healthy, like formative or not necessarily. But I also think we can get a bit too hard on those kind of boundaries. And I think Christians make a lot of media the target of that mindset. But I think a special attention might be given to the fantasy end of the spectrum. Someone might look at like Star Wars and be like, oh, the Force is like a pseudo religion, so don't watch Star Wars. Or Harry Potter has magic in it, so don't read or watch any of that. So that's of the devil. So the name of this topic, our fantasy of the devil, is a bit tongue-in-cheek, but it's just kind of an extension of our other topic a few weeks ago on Christian liberty, just a little bit more conversation about in that direction. So I guess first, Sage, what I would ask you is, did you ever personally have an experience like that in your life where boundaries are kind of placed on what you could watch and couldn't watch? Were there any examples of that you would say were a bit harder? And like, what are your thoughts on that kind of mindset? Was like fantasy ever something you were like not exposed to, but like basically prevented from kind of indulging in on different levels? I don't know if you've had that kind of experience or not.
So me personally, no. I've always thought my parents did a good job of both like teaching me good boundaries and what is sort of healthy for me to watch and listen to and consume in terms of books and media and things like that. But I did grow up in, East Tennessee, in the Southern Baptist Church, so I'm very familiar with churches having a different opinion on the subject than my parents did. Mm-hmm. So, I'm thinking of a number of people that I grew up with, who grew up in the church, who were told that Harry Potter was bad, that it supported Wicca, which is the religion that technically believes in witchcraft, or might not actually believe. Whether it actually believe witchcraft is real, is irrelevant. It's about witchcraft and sort of like pantheism and old pagan religions and things like that. So they assumed that because there was magic in this story, that's what it was. And I think assuming is going to be very important here for the rest of this discussion, the concept of assuming. But I know a number of people who grew up in the church who, maybe not left the church because of this specifically, but it showed them a pattern in how the church reacts to the world around us. So, and we could talk more specifically about Harry Potter later, but it's sort of like people are told that Harry Potter or the Lord of the Rings or whatever fantasy story we're talking about is one thing by the church, which is bad, it's evil, it's talking about witchcraft, it's about the devil, it's pro the devil, all this stuff. Right. And then they read it, and then the themes and the characters and the story proves that wrong.
Right.
In fact, in a lot of these situations that we'll be talking about, it's the opposite. Like these are stories with Christian morality in them that reflect parts of the Bible even, but the entire redemptive narrative of Scripture. And they emphasize that and mirror that. But because magic exists, because elves or orcs, exist, automatically, this is paganism and this is bad. Right. So that, I think, based on my experience of seeing other people around me go through this, that's been the problem, is the church assumes something without knowing it. So I know that many of the pastors or leaders or adults in the church, they never read Harry Potter. They didn't read it. They didn't check it out. They didn't try to learn about J.K. Rowling to see what her views were or what her religious convictions were or what her background was, anything like that. But the mere presence of magic in a story alone told them that this is bad and evil and paganism and against God.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting. So, then I guess my question then too is what is the biblical precedent then that a lot of times people are kind of basing that off of? They're like, oh, that's paganism. But I guess when you see magic in the Bible, what is that, or magic being done by someone in the Bible? What does that usually indicate in that context? Typically.
So, I mean, usually it's connected to worship of other gods, in some sense in the Old Testament. I'm thinking of the seer that Saul goes to see, and she conjures Samuel, who's like, hey, you shouldn't have done this. So I'm thinking of that. I'm thinking of I can never remember the guy's name. There's a guy in the New Testament as well that the apostles run into who's doing magic, but I can't remember for sure if he turns out to be a charlatan or if he's doing actual magic and working with demons or whatever.
Oh, is it Simon? Simon?
Yeah, I believe it's Simon. Yeah. So, I mean, everywhere where magic or something along those lines comes up in Scripture, it's clearly coded as evil and bad because it assumes spiritual or supernatural power outside of God himself, which is interesting because I mean, if you think about it, in Scripture, these powers do technically exist. There are demons who, you know, possess people. So like, so I really don't know. I think that's a big thing. Is like it's negative. So the mere presence of magic is already negative and bad and against God. So there's no critical analysis of what else is happening in these stories.
Yeah. Yeah, it's taken as like very face value, where it's like, oh, there's magic happening here. This is bad. There's magic happening in Star Wars or Harry Potter. That's bad. And like just drawing that parallel based on that, like just the presence of magic. Yeah, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but it makes a lot of sense that's like kind of just, oh, like this thing is here and this thing is there. Oh gosh, it must be bad there too. But I think it's kind of, I don't know. Like, I think it's hard because, like, I don't know. I think like we have to like kind of acknowledge like what is actually imagination and stuff too. Like when we watch something that's a very like fictional story that is like very intentionally telegraphed as being, this is a fictional thing. Like let your imagination run wild a little bit. We're creating an entire world. We're creating entire characters and stories and situations and things like that. I think that like you have to have that added context in there. Like when you're like trying to figure out what boundaries to set, like you have to be able to say like, oh, like, I mean, literally they're just trying to like create this sort of like imaginary world, fantasy world or whatever, where like all these characters inhabit. Like it's not about demonic powers. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's not the intent of why it was created necessarily. I guess that's kind of where I stand on it. But like in terms of like personal, like, I don't know, like my own personal upbringing, it's not like I also had, I think my parents are actually probably more lenient than most people's parents were in terms of like what I watched. Because I remember, so when I couldn't have been any more than 12 years old. It could have been younger than that even. Like we would like on long car trips, we had like this portable DVD player and we would watch all 3 Austin Powers movies. I was 12. I was 12. I didn't understand what was happening. But I think like it's just kind of interesting that like for me there were like a lot less boundaries sort of placed up front. I mean, obviously there were things that I couldn't watch, and usually it was based on like ratings and stuff like that. It's like, oh, when you're older, we'll watch this or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. I didn't have necessarily a very strict background in that sense either. But what I would say too is like it feels like, I don't know, it feels like a little more like whenever there's like a whenever there's too many hard boundaries set on those kinds of things, like just on like what type of media we consume. Oh, there's magic in it, so it must be bad. I think it also results in like sort of the opposite effect of like what is being intended. Like the intention is they should avoid this because it's bad. But I think what you're actually doing is you're creating a like mysticism around it where it's like, oh, I'm not supposed to have that. So like, I want to do it more. You know what I mean? So like, it's kind of like, you want to like put all these boundaries in place and everything. But I think especially if like we're dealing with something that's kind of like more removed from its context, like magic in the Bible versus magic in media, I think it's like very easy to see how thin that justification is versus like saying, oh no, like human sexuality is important, so we don't want to watch this particular thing. Does that make sense? Like, I feel like that's kind of like my own sort of experience growing up with that, but I don't know. Like, where do you think the mindset of like limiting a person's media consumption comes from? Do you think that's like from a good place or a bad place? Or like, how far is too far? How far is not far enough? Or yeah, I don't know. Obviously there's some of that that's like a little more flexible, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think it's very similar to with media consumption, books and things like that. It's very similar to how I view the church's response to alcohol, over the last 150 years, especially in America. So the church sees something that could potentially be bad. Obviously, if the most popular book in the world was how to do magic, how to actually how to do blood sacrifices, like that would be a problem. So because we have such a difficult time, in a lot of the church, in talking about moderation and actually exploring that and seeing what does that mean practically, what does that actually mean in terms of alcohol consumption. We can clearly see in the Bible that drunkenness is a bad thing, that it alters your state of mind, it affects your judgment, any number of things is wrong about it. But we also see people drinking a lot and not getting drunk. And it's not said that that's bad in any way. Jesus turned water into wine and conceivably drank some of the wine, because I imagine he probably stayed at the party. Because his mom was there, so you imagine that there was probably some family connection.
That's right.
So,
and he did tell his disciples to drink wine.
Exactly. That's what we are in theory supposed to do every time we have communion. So there's this concept of moderation that we aren't always very good at in the church. So what we do in attempting to keep people away from the worst possible version of this thing, that is actually something that people can run into. Alcohol is a problem because people don't know when enough is enough. So in order to keep people from that, leaders in the church, theologians, pastors, popes, all sorts of things, just tell people to stay away from it wholesale, because it's easier to say, this is bad, don't do it, than, well, in some cases it's bad, but you have to keep in mind moderation, and that you learn about your own alcohol consumption rate and how much you can have before it becomes a problem. So it's just it's a shorter conversation. And it's easier to say, don't do X, than have a lecture series and a series of conversations about how much is too much and all that. So I think people are afraid because, like I said, if there was a blood sacrifice, blood magic manual out there, that would be bad. And we wouldn't want Christians to read and consume that, because it would actually be against the Bible. But in this case, with something like Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings or The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, while there is magic in these things, while there is even imagery taken from Celtic, myth and myths from around the world to help populate, and create these settings, what's important with art, with novels, with fantasy novels, with movies, with all these things, with paintings even, is theme, is message, is intention. So like all this other stuff. So the setting is only a tool by which you say something. And I think what we need to be more aware of is finding out what is being said in art, in movies, in film, in books, in all these things before we really take a hard stance against something, is find out what it's trying to say, and then also find out, is it good at saying it? Because for example, I love the A Song of Ice and Fire books, which is what the Game of Thrones TV show is based on. And it has an amazing message about how war is just evil. War is a bad thing that drives human beings apart from each other and makes them brutal and unkind. And it's a good message, ultimately, that the novels are trying to get across. But you can also look at that and say, the setting is very brutal. because how else would you possibly show that war is bad other than showing what war is and does to people? That's how you do that. Now, you can read these and say, the language is too harsh. It's too violent. There's too much sexuality in ways I don't appreciate. And that's totally fine. Mm-hmm. But when we're talking about Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, things like that, there is magic.
Yeah.
But it's not unbelievably super violent per se. You could argue the Lord of the Rings movies are.
Right.
But like the books and things like that, they're not super violent. And the authors, J.K. Rowling, grew up in the Anglican Church. She has publicly said that she's a Christian numerous times and talks about her doubts often, as we have in our deconstruction episodes. So she very much has a Christian experience. So this is a Christian person. J.R.R. Tolkien was a Christian who, was best friends with C.S. Lewis, who we of course know is a Christian, is an unbelievable theologian, practical lay theologian. So I think that's something that we have to change how we view this. So like, if there's violence and sexuality in certain things, that's something we can talk about. That is a problem for some people, in the sense of how much is too much for you, and then the sexuality, of course, that's a very touchy one. But when we're talking about magic or imagery, that's setting, that's tools by which a message is given. And in a lot of these fantasy novels and things like that, the themes in and of themselves are Christian themes. If you look into Harry Potter, Harry Potter's journey is a mirror in a lot of ways of Jesus's journey. At the end of the, near the end of the last movie, or it might be the second to last movie, they split it up or something. Harry dies and then comes back to life, and then ultimately they defeat the bad guy, save the day, save the world, all that. So a lot of this it mirrors Christianity. It comes out of Christianity. It's people who are Christians who, in a way, are doing an excellent Jesus juke, as as our young missionaries would understand, is like when a conversation is at one place and then you bring it around to Jesus. Like that's what they've done in these cases, is they're bringing Christian ideas and Christian themes to the world, to people who aren't going to go to church, but who would love to pick up a book about, this special kid with magical powers. It reflects Jesus. And I would venture to say some people have taken steps towards the church, like from reading Harry Potter and then doing research into J.K. Rowling and her background, and, seeing some of her interviews and things like that. So I think we need to be careful, and we need to look at intention and the message behind things, not just, is there magic or not?
Yeah, for sure. Do you feel like that's particularly why fantasy tends to get singled out as a genre? Is just because of the presence of magic? Is there like anything else in particular, or is it mainly just that? I feel like it probably is the vast majority, like, oh, the magic is in this. That's basically it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for a lot, particularly more conservative Christians, like, yeah, magic, easy. Oh, wizards are in it, it's bad. And I think that's true. And then Lord of the Rings, as I was talking about, J.R.R. Tolkien, we know is a Christian. He did study, ancient English folklore and, Celtic myths and things like that. So he did use imagery from those, and like, creatures like elves, which are basically fairies and those sorts of things. He used those to create a setting to tell a certain story that has a lot of Christian, overtones and Christian themes. So even though now we fairly well, I think most people understand that about Lord of the Rings. Mm-hmm. There were undoubtedly people of that time, and even some people today, who still are not okay with Lord of the Rings as Christians, precisely for that reason. Is, oh, this uses fairies, this uses pagan imagery and things like that. Some people think the pagan imagery, or imagery that evokes pagan symbols or anything like that, if that's used at all, then immediately it's a non-starter, and we can't go there. But mm-hmm. you know, and I'm obviously more liberal on this. I think that's clear. I don't agree. I think the symbols used are less important than the themes and the message behind the work, because that's what kids even are learning. When you read these novels, it's not just like, oh, it's so cool, magic. It's like, oh, it's like, children are smarter than we think they are. I think, especially in the church, that's something that we miss, is that children are actually kind of smart. Because mm-hmm. I don't know if you know this, but all people, smart people especially, were children at one point. And, you know, like,
dumb screaming child. Yeah, no, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, even so. But just like, kids pick up on these themes.
Yeah,
kids recognize these relationships that these characters have, and they see mm-hmm. the change that these characters undergo throughout the course of a movie or a book or whatever. So they're not stupid.
Right.
And some kids are probably just reading it because, like, oh, magic's cool.
Yeah.
But other people are reading it and staying with it, not because magic's in it, because there are so many books and movies that have magic in them.
Right.
There's something about the characters, there's something about the story being told that draws people in, and that's why it's one of the most popular books ever.
Yeah.
And I think we should note, one of the most popular books ever, and not only Harry Potter, but also Lord of the Rings, another incredibly mm-hmm. popular book, mm-hmm. were written by Christians using Christian themes. So I think we need to take notice of that when we start to critique things and say they're bad or demonic.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, kids pick up on the world in like very different ways from the way we do, you know, and I feel like I'm kind of coming to terms with that a little bit in terms of like revisiting some of the older media that I consumed when I was growing up. To the surprise of no one, I watched a lot of SpongeBob growing up, and it was actually kind of funny. I've revisited a bit of it recently, and it's like, you pick up on a lot of things when you're an adult that you don't quite absorb when you're a kid. But when you're a kid, you're like caught up in the wonderment of the setting and the world and like the characters and the silliness involved. That much you could figure out. Like the things you think are funny as a kid, there's like a little bit of that in there too. But like at the same time, there's like a lot of actual like nuance in that show, and there's a lot of nuance in a lot of the things that like that. I feel like the best kids media is the type of media that has that kind of effect, where as a kid you can appreciate it because of those particular reasons that are more, I don't know, that are more imaginative and fantastical. And then like when you revisit it as an adult, you're like, oh, like, okay, like I'm actually picking up on a lot of stuff here that I didn't before. So yeah, I don't know. I think it's interesting that I don't think we like give kids enough credit for like what they're capable of being able to consume. Like, you know, should I have watched Austin Powers when I was like 12? Probably not. I mean, but at the same time, it didn't like destroy me. You know what I mean? Like it didn't like ruin me as a person. Maybe the whole reason I'm messed up is because I watched Austin Powers when I was 12, you know, but I doubt it. I'm sure there's plenty of other reasons too. But yeah, I don't know. It's kind of interesting. Like we just don't let kids kind of absorb that mm-hmm. kind of setting and just let it be what it is, which is just kind of an imaginative space.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Not only are kids smarter than we think they are, like you said, kids are more resilient than we think they are.
Absolutely.
And it's one of those things growing up, I think, what helped me along, you know, like in education was my parents always telling me, you're mm-hmm. smart, you're going to go to college. it primed me to be able to do those things and to believe that I had the ability to do it. So I think when we keep our kids from this stuff, it's almost like sort of, so in order to build up your immunities, you have to be exposed to the world. So to build up your immune system. So like if we keep our kids from things outside of the world, when they run into those things later, they're going to do way more damage than if they experience them, early on. So, that's why I think public school is a good thing. It teaches kids how to socialize with people at a young age, so they're not incredibly socially awkward around others and things like that. So like to be resilient, and I think everyone has the capability to be resilient. Everybody's got everybody has the same muscles in their body that can be trained or not trained. I think everyone has the ability to be resilient. The question is, as a parent, are you going to allow your child to learn to be resilient? Are you gonna tell them that they are, so that they believe it, so that they can actually do that, so that they can be resilient? And I think this is one of those things, is if you believe that your child's faith, or your faith even, like a lot of these people are worried that if they read it, they might go to hell. That's a genuine concern, or has been for a number of people. If you believe your faith isn't strong enough to read Harry Potter and then still have faith, that's a problem that you seriously need to look into in yourself.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think what you said earlier, Sage, about banning it outright just being a lot easier to do. It's a lot harder to allow that stuff to be in your child's life and to have a conversation about it, and to also like help delineate like what those themes are about, or how that relates to the Bible, or how that relates to what Jesus has done. That's harder to do. That involves a conversation, that involves like a relational investment, but it's just a lot easier to say, oh, well, this thing is bad and I don't want my kid to do anything bad, so I'm not going to let them watch anything that has that bad thing in it. It's just a lot easier to blanket ban stuff like that, as opposed to treating your kid like a human being, and we have no parenting advice. Like, none. We're terrible at this. So don't take any particular advice from us about I don't know. Like, all we can really relate is like our own experiences growing up and everything. Like, all of us were kids at one point and absorbed stuff about the world. And I don't know. I think that like you can also see the effects of what over sheltering does, and like what sort of preventing like media consumption that actually is like really not that bad. You can kind of see what that stuff does over time, but yeah, I don't know. It's your kid, like I would hope. And if obviously, like, I think it's just important to like be able to have conversations about those things along the way, no matter where you fall on this stuff. It's like, it's about like, it's ultimately about like your relationship with them, just like any other human interaction. It's about your relationship. It's about I don't know. It's yeah, like, I mean, that's basically it. It's about loving God, loving your neighbor, and your neighbor extends to everyone around you, And so like, I think it's important to like approach these things with wisdom, to be able to draw lines when you need to draw lines, and to be able to say, okay, this isn't so bad. Like, ease off the gas a little bit on other things, but yeah. Moderation, Sage.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's come up in all the simple solutions.
Yeah. Yep.
It's come up in the main topic.
I
think I am going to start a moderate party. It's going to be a political party opposed to the Republicans and the Democrats. And what we are going to propose is moderation in all things.
Never heard of it. Sounds good. Good luck out there.
And that's the problem. Nobody's ever heard of it, but I'm going to make it happen.
That's right. That's right. Well, more power to you. Good luck, friend. Good luck on your journey. Thank you all for listening to the main topic. And now we will move into our email land segment. Somewhere on an island west of the archipelago, several emails have gathered together to form a nation unto their own, and it was called Email Land. You've now entered Email Land. Let's look at what the email civilians of Email Land are up to today. I have one email this week. Very simple, straightforward email from our good friend, Cody. Here we go. Best and worst character from The Office, and why? Actually, you know what? It'd probably be a good idea to save this one for John, potentially, because I know John would have a very passionate opinion about this.
So I would like to counter with, John's not here.
Oh, okay.
Because he's in jail for 5 years because of bad decisions that he made, likely in Texas. He could have gotten in a fight at a bar and then gone to a certain megachurch pastor in Dallas's church and slashed some jet tires. Okay. So because John is not here, because of his own decisions, I think we should do this anyway. If in the future, after he gets out of prison, he decides he wants to answer the question, he can take some time out of the the next podcast we do with him in it to give his answers. I think we should do this anyway so that he has to listen to this.
That's on him. You're right. That's all on him. So, all right. Best and worst character. What's your opinion, Sage?
So, best character. Actually, you know what? I'll do worst character first. So, for me, the worst character in the show is Danny Cordray, played by Timothy Olyphant. And let me explain. Okay. Wasn't enough of him. He pops up 2-3 times max. Yeah. For not very long. I'm a huge Timothy Olyphant fan. He was the lead in Justified. And in every movie or TV show he's in, I am instantly made happier by the fact that he's in it. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to say Danny Cordray is the worst character because there wasn't enough of him. Okay. All right. Fair enough. They underused him. All right. Best one. Best character. So this is where it gets tough. There's a lot of different directions that I could go. Mm-hmm. One part of me wants to say Dwight because he's one of the most quotable characters of all time. Yes. One part of me wants to go with Michael. And it doesn't feel like there's not a ton of wrong answers to the best Office character question. It's true. It's really all a matter of personal taste. Yes. So I'm going to go off the board. Okay. And I'm going to say Gabe. Yeah. Good choice, actually. That's pretty good. When Gabe shows up to the Halloween party dressed as Lady Gaga, I was straight up I was slayed. I was slayed in the spirit with comedy in that moment. My God. So I'm gonna go Gabe as an underrated, hilarious side character in all the proceedings. Yes, that's a good choice. Good choice. I would say this is controversial. I think Andy has a lot of great moments. Great moments. However, late Andy sucks. He sucks. Yeah, I think I am going to stick with Andy as probably my least favorite character in The Office. He's fine, but it just felt like after Michael leaves, they don't really know what to do with him. So they kind of make him into Michael a little bit. And then it just felt like season 9 rolls around. They just throw all of that out. And they're like, oh, we're just going to make you hate him. He's still very self-absorbed and doesn't really care about anybody. But yeah, I don't know. It was kind of weird what they did with his character a little bit. So I would say probably a negative there. I'd say probably my favorite character is Kevin. Yeah. I mean, I shouldn't even have to explain that. Don't be a caricature, obvious. Kevin. Don't be a caricature, Kevin. It's so good. All right. This has been Email Land. Thank you for listening to Email Land. If you have a question you would like to write in, it doesn't have to be anything serious. It can be. You can ask us anything that we talked about on this podcast. You can ask us about anything we've talked on the previous 39 episodes of the extended edition. You can ask us anything you want about our personal selves.
Just send us emails, please, because we would like to hear from you, and we want this to be a dialogue in as much as is possible in a podcast format. So please write us if you are able. Stop your car, stop your podcast app, or continue listening to your podcast app, but exit your podcast app to open the web browser portion of your podcast app and type in bitesizetheology.com/contact. That is bitesizetheology.com/contact. And that will put you in touch with our contact form where you can fill out all of that information and just let us know how you're feeling. We want to hear from you. Okay. Thank you very much for everybody who has listened to this insanity. Our social medias are at Bite Theology on Twitter. We are Bite Size Theology, all one word, on Instagram. We are Bite Size Theology on Facebook. And that's the social medias. We also have a YouTube channel, so you can watch this horrible podcast anywhere you want. Watch it on YouTube, actually. That's the only place you could get it. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the last word over to John. Thanks, John. Appreciate your input there. Hope everybody has a great rest of your week, and we'll catch you on the next one. As soon as I can figure out how to stop recording. Okay, we're done. Not having John here turns out very challenging. All right, everybody have a great rest of your week. Goodbye.